Hello and welcome back. We are back from the holiday break as the Avs are gearing up for another game tonight themselves coming out of the holiday break. But this is Guerilla Sports Off Ice. We got a great show for you guys today. And this show is brought to you guys by Trusted American Mortgage. Go to trustedamerican.com right now. Their salary-based mortgage consultants want to help you get into a lower interest rate and lower your monthly payment. Again, that's trustedamerican.com and see how much money they can save you today. Hello and welcome in.
Please do not leave your luggage unattended on the station.
Welcome to the show. Hello and welcome to the show. Welcome back from the holiday break. And Megan, I'll be honest, it was needed. That Avs schedule had kicked my butt to start the year. So it was nice to get a few days there where weren't having to be at the rink and things like that. But I'm already ready to be back around the guys and all that. How was your Christmas?
It was really great. It was a nice break from hockey, but you're never fully away from hockey. Yeah. We made gingerbread sugar cookies and decorated them to look like 20 of Avalanche players. So yeah, I can't show you pictures of them because it was a group project and some of them came out bad.
But that sounds like some of them came out pretty good then.
Some of them came out good. Kind of random ones.
What song did you have to sing?
I sang Wild Flowers and Wild Horses by Lainey Wilson.
Never even heard of that.
I hadn't heard of it either, so I had to learn it.
Okay, so I'm not weird for having not heard of it.
But it was a great pick. It was from my brother, and it was perfect. So the gift exchange went great.
Great. Well, happy to hear that. Anything else interesting from your holiday break here the last couple of days, or just Christmas stuff?
Just Christmas stuff. It was relatively low stress. Really fun. The karaoke thing. I think we sang a little too much karaoke, and by the end of it all, we were a little karaoke'd out.
Few beverages to help, or not really?
No, we're trying to keep it a little drier this Christmas.
Well, we got a lot to get into today, man.
Yeah.
And really, we've got a lot to get into all from one perspective. You and I saw an article that came out. I keep wanting to say over the weekend. We're staring down the weekend.
Feels like it was.
Feels like the weekend. An article came out this week. An interview with Ivan Prosvetov, who spent a relatively limited amount of time here in Colorado, all things considered. We got to know him pretty well. I got to know Ivan decently well. I think he's a great individual, incredibly nice guy, always willing to chat, always willing just to have a sidebar conversation about whatever. And I told you, I thought he was a better goalie than he got the opportunity to show here in Denver. But have you read the article?
I have.
Or the translated version of the article. Basically, he came out and had a lot of not great things to say about the Avalanche organization in particular, and the coaching staff, and saying that there's a lack of understanding for goaltenders and that they have a flawed approach and all this, that, and the other. And so that caused you and I to say, well, we think it's probably a good time for a goalie show. And then the Avs threw us a bone this morning and got a Mackenzie Blackwood 5-year, $5.25 AAV deal done. And there's a whole lot around that I think we can unpack. Not only what we think of the deal, what we think of the goaltender so far, the timing of the extension. Megan, you can make the argument that this morning the Avs decided we need to change our approach and our philosophy to how we handle the starting goaltender in Colorado. And what does that mean after the organization just went out and spent a lot of draft picks on goaltenders, including one that is very highly touted right now, is being looked at as maybe the next best Russian prospect after Igor Shesterkin, with a quote from someone coming out this morning saying they think he's better than Igor Shesterkin. How does this affect all of it? What does it mean? Let's start off the top with what you and I originally were going to talk about before we get into the Mackenzie Blackwood side of everything. This article, quoting Ivan Prosvetov, says that him and UC Parkla were speaking different languages, that Parkla doesn't have a good understanding of what it takes to be a pro goaltender, and that neither does Jared Bednar because he's a player coach. Let's start here with Parkla. I'm a big Parkla guy. I think he's done a lot of good in Colorado. What were your thoughts reading through what Prozzy had to say about the way the coaching is handled here in Colorado for goaltenders? Or you can really take it any direction you want. You don't have to be coaching, but
I like Prosvetov too. So I had this sense of he has every right to utilize a platform and share his thoughts. I'm not critical of that. He's absolutely fine to speak his mind. But I can't help but feel a little skepticism around some of what he's saying. And it's tough to, it obviously didn't work out here in Colorado. I also felt he maybe deserved a better fate or shake of things.
Yep.
But it reads a little sour grapes. We kind of talked about that in the text message because things didn't work out. And so I question the motive then behind some of what he's saying alongside then the validity. It sort of challenges it just a little bit. And I think it's easy to take kernels of truth and then maybe if there are some feelings around his time here, it grows a little bit into something different. And that's how I feel about it because Parkla's track record is observable to all fans who watch the Avs and can look season by season at different goaltenders who've come through the system. And Georgiev being the most recent where maybe there is some criticism that you could have or question around Parkla's ability to work with Georgiev through some of what appeared to be mental hurdles here in year 2 and 3. But beyond that, his year 1 career best for Georgiev and season by season, goalies have just been made better through here. And I think it's interesting going back to how Georgiev has talked about Parkla and his time together, and then reading past articles of goaltenders who've worked with him. Francouz talked about working with him, and at one point Varley and Parkla quite literally did speak a different language. And, his time with Varley in the KHL before coming over really helped to change the way that Varley played the game. Parkla tweaked Francouz's stance, and this is another goaltender that was kind of viewed as a prospect and then transformed into, could he be a starter somewhere else? Maybe not in Colorado, but if not for the injury, it was a real conversation around Francouz at one point. And I remember even Kemper's short-lived time here, the notable difference in how he pushed post to post was changed by Parkla to make him a little bit more stable. And his movements behind the net was also addressed by Parkla, and he won a Stanley Cup even with one functioning eye.
Yeah.
And so it's hard for me then to be super critical of Parkla. And I think some of the criticisms I've seen are informed by disappointment in Georgiev not working out in Colorado.
Yep.
And it's tough because I look at his year 1 and I credit a lot of what Georgiev did individually. I think people maybe could be quick to say Georgiev's year 1 was good because he was backstopping a team now that has a Makar and a McKinnon and a Rantanen, but it was the title defense season and they missed Makar and McKinnon for big parts of that regular season. So I credit Georgiev a lot for the success that year. And at the end of the day, Georgiev has a say in this too.
Yep.
So it's hard for me to have horrible criticism of Parkla when I've seen such good for Grubauer, for Kemper, for Francouz, Georgiev to a different extent. And then similarly, I've seen criticisms of his credentials be called into question.
Yep.
And I feel defensive of Parkla too, because he played goalie up until 18. He didn't play goaltender professionally, and he went to do his year of service in Finland, at 18. And when he returned, he was immediately interested in coaching and started working with youth players kind of voluntarily in the beginning. Peter Baugh has a really great article about Parkla's trajectory to coaching, and it is a bit unconventional, but this is someone who has been drawn to the position of goaltending since he was a child. And so I think it's a bit unfair to suggest that he wouldn't have a say around the philosophy of goaltending, which was sort of suggested in Prosvetov's comments that maybe perhaps he hasn't played at a professional level, so he shouldn't be taken as seriously. But it's true of a good amount of coaches, maybe not specific to the goaltending position, but I think that there are other goaltenders, Francouz included, who would counter that in the value that working with Parkla has brought to them.
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned Varley in the KHL. I'm going to circle back to that in just a second. But, I so agree with what you said about so much of the criticism I feel like is tied to the recent disappointment of Alexander Georgiev and by proxy, Justus Annunen this year as well. Megan, go back to that first year with Georgiev, career year. And what were we all saying? The goalie whisperer does it again. UC Parkla has come in and made a goaltender into a better goaltender. And they found a guy who was undervalued, and they were able to get him on the cheap. And all they needed to do was get him in the hands of UC Parkla, and you got yourself a starter. So it's amazing how quickly that conversation became, can UC Parkla really do this? And I just saw a comment in the chat, I believe from Vaguely, saying, right here. Most of the criticism is that he hasn't produced anything. He's only modified goalies that have come in. With the stage that the Avalanche are at and what they're asking UC Parkla to do, it is not to produce the next great goaltender. It's to take the goaltenders that they've brought in on moderate deals and make them into goaltenders that can backstop a championship team. And he did that very literally one year. He improved goaltenders year over year. I'm going to reference our buddy Nathan Rudolph put out a tweet this morning. Under UC Parkla, Semyon Varlamov, who he had previously worked with before over in Russia, had the third best statistical year of his career in the NHL as a starter. Grubauer, his second best year as a starter. The only year that was better for Grubauer was the year where he was kind of the 1A, 1B with Holtby before losing his job when the Caps went on to win the Stanley Cup. Francouz was the best statistical backup in Avalanche history. Darcy Kemper had the second best year of his career as a starter, leading to a Stanley Cup championship. Alexander Georgiev, to your point, Megan, had a career year in Colorado, his first year arriving. You just are not going to convince me that the goaltending coach that has overseen all of that is the problem.
And I just think we need to tamper our expectation around what an NHL goaltender coach does, because
Correct.
Justus Annunen was the closest to being homegrown developed, but there are realities about who works most closely with Justus Annunen. Any goaltender that is staring down elite NHL potential spends a decent amount in the American League. Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, Askarov, Dostal, Wolf, they are working alongside their AHL goaltending coaches significantly before they enter the NHL conversation. They're usually spending a little bit of time between AHL, NHL, and that only recently happened for Justus Annunen. He gets time up around training camp working with UC Parkla, but that's a limited window each year that he's working directly with Parkla. And that's not to say Parkla has no influence throughout the course of the year, but more of that's coming from the AHL goaltending coach. That's why Annunen talked most about Budaj. It was who he worked with the most and who he benefited the most from.
Totally.
And so I think it's a little bit unfair to hang that on Parkla, who has not had Annunen in his development for as long as another goaltending coach. You know, the realities about when a goaltender, a young one, enters that NHL conversation and starts working directly under the NHL goaltending coach, he's not that young at that point. He's going to be in his early to mid 20s, and he's going to have experienced then a lot of development before that. Your timeline for evaluating a goaltender and their development under the NHL goaltending coach kind of starts a little bit later. Mm-hmm. And I think it's unfair then to hang that on Parkla. And I also think Annunen's timeline was rushed 1 year too soon.
Yeah, which you've said multiple times.
And I think the organization had no choice. But again, that's where I'm granting then Parkla a couple more allowances in that instance. And they're just not in a position to, like, from birth,
Yeah.
not
yeah.
literally,
No,
but
no, no,
the
yeah.
birth of a young goaltender, develop in that way. And I think that's going to be the interesting thing about Nabokov is in talking about Dostal, Askarov, Wolf, all of those players spent a decent amount in the American League, at least splitting time for around 2 to 3 seasons. That's going to be close to the case for Nabokov. It would be crazy to expect him to be ready for the NHL immediately in year one.
Well, and so back to the development argument on this. Even those goalies that you just listed, Megan, Dostal is maybe the only one that you can say, like, yeah, this guy is either already has or is in the process of solidifying himself as an NHL starter. All those other guys are still trying to win starting jobs.
Exactly. And they're considered elite,
Correct.
like the next
elite
best goaltenders.
Correct. Yes. And so, like, then on top of that, we'll circle back to Nabokov, but in that article that came out today, that there's a couple of KHL teams who are saying, we think this guy is going to be better than Shesterkin. Well, Igor Shesterkin, the Rangers didn't develop that guy. He came over from the KHL, played half a season in the American League, and was at like almost a 940. And they were like, yeah, this guy's ready for the next stage. So it's not necessarily like even a goaltender like that or Andrei Vasilevsky were like, oh man, they came in and they worked every single day with the goaltending coach in their respective cities. And they, grew this homegrown talent. It's like, no, you had goaltenders fall into your lap that not fall into your lap. You drafted them and scouted them, but like that really took off and took the next, took the next step before they even got to town.
Joey Decourt, a great example from Vaguely, is 28 years old. The timeline for goaltenders is just so different that, Parkla working with these goaltenders who aren't 21 years old, I don't think should take away from the fact that the modifications that he made them better goaltenders.
Yeah. No, and so there's a question, there's a super chat up here, Hurricane Teabag. Great to hear from you. Obligatory Moose question for the Blackwood convo. We'll circle back to this. I'll pull the comment back up in a minute, but because we are going to talk about contract and how it all impacts everything. But it's always good to see you in the chat, Hurricane.
Hurricane again.
Hurricane again. Oh my gosh. Yes, and this is how we will end the show today with the Nabokov.
I jumped ahead with Nabokov, but I will stay.
Well, no, but I think
I'll stay back.
I think it's all relevant. It all ties together, So we're going to circle back to both of these here in a little bit, Hurricane. But again, thank you so much. Another $2 on the super chat. Hurricane. We will be coming back to these. So, again, just the argument of like, well, they're not developing stuff. I also want to talk about Jared Bednar quickly, and then we can start transitioning towards the Blackwood conversation. Prosvetov also calls out Jared Bednar didn't know how to handle the goalies. He's not a goalie. I think there is something else that is being lost here a lot when you're talking about the Justus Annunen conversation, the Prosvetov conversation, and how the Avs handle goalies. And to your point about what an NHL goalie coach is actually really looking to do, all of that is even different when you're talking about a team that's in the stage that the Avs are, where it's cup or bust every year. And we need points and we need wins and we need to climb in the standings. And, Jared Bednar's talking about it. This is not a development league. This is a league where you've got to be ready to play. And I think that's maybe something that, unfortunately for Prosvetov, he was at a stage in his career where he needed more development.
100%.
And the Avalanche, not saying the Eagles, the Avalanche were just not in a position to give him that. And that's okay, because they weren't looking to develop a goalie. They were they were on the heels of Pavel Francouz, who they thought they had. They did not realize at the time it was a career-ending injury. That was the level of backup goaltender that they needed, was someone who is a borderline starter. And I just don't think it's super fair to say Jared Bednar doesn't know how to handle playing his goaltenders when Jared Bednar's approach to how he's coaching this team is different today than it was the day he showed up and they were trying to build to get into the playoffs.
And I think it's kind of scapegoating Bednar. And I don't want to suggest that Prosvetov doesn't have a better view of how the team works than someone like me. But It's clear to me how much Jared Bednar leans on people like Parkala to make decisions around goaltending. And I feel like the extent of the decisions he's making is sort of who's starting on a given night based upon who gives them the best chance to win. But in terms of who's being brought into the mix for goaltending options, I think he just wants somebody that he sees his team has confidence in.
Yep.
And that feels like the extent of his input there.
Yep.
And so I don't think he meddles too much in the goaltending decisions.
I don't either.
And things like Prosvetov were a little puzzling at the time because it was clearly a goaltender that was on the brink of like being a prospect versus just needing to solidify what he is at the NHL level. Like the Arizona organization at the time wasn't really sure what to do with him either. And so I always felt a little bad that he's going to an organization where the path to the NHL is only made more challenging because it was clear Georgiev was the starter at the time, and they just lacked a little bit of confidence in Onunen, which stunk because they tried to give Onunen that opportunity the next year, but it was a little bit forced, and it just wasn't the best case scenario for a Prosvetov or an Onunen. Both just ended up on the short end of that stick.
Before we move on and talk about the front office and the way that they've approached all of it, because that's another thing that I think I texted you this morning. I think people are blurring the lines on goaltending coaching decisions is why the Avs can't keep goalies. And I think that's being blurred with a front office approach that has a lot of influence on this. Before we transition to that, very interesting interview on the Spit and Chicklets podcast. Paul Bissonnette, Ryan Whitney, maybe the most popular hockey podcast that's out there. They had Tuukka Rask on last week. And that's all the context I'm going to give, but I'm going to play it because golly jeepers, gee whiz, I feel like this is just interesting time.
Goalie coach that has developed a lot of the goalies over there and helped like make them into star NHL players.
Yeah, there have been. I think I want to say the most famous one probably is Jussi Parkkila, who's in Colorado now. He's been there maybe 6-7 years. He was my goalie coach in juniors. Then he went to Russia. A bunch of the Finnish goalie coach actually went to Russia. I would say 3 or 4 guys 15 years ago. And they, now you see Vasilevsky, Varlamov, Sorokin, all these guys.
No shit.
If not all of them, at least a good bunch of them have been coached by a Finnish goalie coach in Russia. And that kind of shows you that, where the Finnish goaltending coaching, is and has.
So there you go.
Unprompted. A month ago.
Brings up Jussi Parkkila saying he's the most famous Finnish goalie coach that's now continuing to work his magic over in the NHL. And the part that I just found most interesting was Ivan Prosvetov saying in the US, there's a lot of goalie coaches who have never played and who don't really understand. That's not the case here in Russia. We've got the good goalie coaches in Russia. And Tuukka Rask draws attention to the fact that, yeah, that's exactly where Jussi Parkkila got his start as a pro goalie coach. And that's where a lot of Finnish goalie coaches go. And geez, when you look around now, there's a lot of products of these Finnish goalie coaches dominating the NHL. So again, I don't want to, call out Ivan Prosvetov too much here. I think he's a good dude. I think he's a good goaltender who I do believe will at least get another opportunity in the NHL. Whether he takes that opportunity or not is up to him. But I felt a little sour grapes to me.
It did. And I share the same opinion. I really liked Prosvetov, but Tuukka Rask is a pretty good source. He's got a good pulse for goaltending. He represents some of the best of goaltenders. And I think to be asked, if there's any famous Finnish goaltending coaches, it's Jussi Parkkila for a reason. And I think his unconventional path to coaching, maybe that's where I feel really defensive of him. It's kind of an underdog story, and he works very hard. I don't get to see every minute that Parkkila puts into his job, but I see a lot of the time that he puts into it, just in watching every opposing morning skate. And I think that it's the kind of care at that position, and it's what's been shared with me from players like Georgiev, that his attention to detail is pretty unique to him. And, it's that Finnish perfectionist kind of mentality, but it has clearly made goaltenders better.
Well, and the reason I won't even say like defensive of UC Parkland, but the reason that I'm a defender of his is since he got to town this season and I guess parts of last year, that was the first time it's really felt like we've had to have the goalie conversation. Like the Avs have gotten good to well above average goaltending all the way up until last year with Georgiev. You had Grubauer as a Vezina finalist. You had Darcy Kemper, who, if you go look at his numbers, and even you and I have said on podcasts together for years that Darcy Kemper's 1 year in Colorado was so massively underrated for how well he actually played. And then you had Pavel Francouz, who I had sources confirm to me. There are teams lined up prepared to make him a 1A if he gets to the market. And, you know, he swept the Edmonton Oilers in the Western Conference Final. Like the Avs have had very good goaltending for the last half a decade, 5 to 7 years. And now it suddenly became a problem here in the last 9 months. And I think it was easy to point the finger there. Let's talk about the philosophy of this front office, because I do think that is being conflated a little bit here with, again, Prosvetov says the Avs, well, you see, they're having a hard time keeping goalies. That is because the front office has been very strict on how much they're willing to pay, how much term they're willing to give. And I have always attributed a large portion of that to they trust that UC Parkla is going to turn out whoever they bring in here into a starting caliber goaltender. Does it feel to you, I guess let me ask you this first. Does that feel like a fair assessment to you of what I just said?
Absolutely.
About the front office?
Yeah, we highly touted it. Like they take a gamble in net and they've done a pretty good job of that.
Today, they went against what they've done in recent years. And they gave out a 5-year deal north of $5 million to a goaltender. It has been a while since they've done that. Does this today show a shift in the way that the front office might be approaching this?
100%. And the writing...
Ooh, that was a more confident answer than I was expecting.
The writing was on the wall. Like, I go back to what we were talking about in the mailbag show when we were projecting what a Blackwood extension might look like. And I think that the goaltender market has dictated this in large part in seeing Shesterkin, Swayman, and those are obviously high-level elite goaltenders.
Correct.
So the type of contract that they can command is going to be very different from anything the Avs could possibly be looking at. But when you see then with the cap projected to potentially go up as high as 97 mil and the goaltenders commanding more at the position than we've ever seen before, and then when you look at where contracts are at, it was going to be hard for Mackenzie Blackwood to come in at a number anything less than a 5.
Yep.
That was pretty easy to guess, just looking at the trends with the goaltenders who are sitting around the 6 mil mark. Mackenzie Blackwood potentially has higher upside, but is still a bit unproven. And so that was sort of where that was based around. And so in knowing that and knowing Chris McFarland has already said prior to today that they have every intention of extending Mackenzie Blackwood, that they didn't just bring in a goaltender for 4 months.
Yep.
It's like, okay, so there's intention to keep him past this year. This is what I'm seeing trending in the goaltender market. And when you look at what is left ahead at free agency coming into the summer, it's looking a little bit grim. And then there's the Georgiev of it all. I think this was a cautionary tale for what happens when the gamble in goaltending doesn't go to plan.
So I'm going to ask a question. You're making so many good points, but I'm going to ask a question from my rundown that I think supports exactly what you're just saying. So not only is the question, did the contract move today change the philosophy on it? But if the answer is yes, how much did this season, and more specifically, the previous tandem, affect that?
It's a great question because the Avs previously kind of bucked trends when it came to what they did with goaltending. So I want to give some credit when I'm talking about what I saw trending, that the Avs have deviated from that in what they've done to create their goaltending tandem year by year. But I think it's the Georgiev component that made me consider it might be time for them to consider what's going on with goaltending,
Yep.
what's the market like, and what's trending. They might be forced to approach this position a little bit differently. And Georgiev experiencing the struggles that he did forced them to require something that could instill a little more confidence in them. And it sounds strange because Georgiev coming to Colorado was a backup behind a Shesterkin who was trying to prove that he could be a starter. Mackenzie Blackwood coming to Colorado has at least, this season with the Sharks prior to this one as a bona fide starter and started this year as a bona fide starter. And his troubles in New Jersey could pretty easily be chalked up to injury. So it actually feels to me like Blackwood in this current state is less of a gamble than Georgiev was coming into Colorado. And so I think that's what I mean when I say there's a little less risk. There's always risk. It's goaltending.
Totally.
But that's another part of the trend is obviously teams invest in having a player like Shesterkin or Vasilevsky or Hellebuck. But even Hellebucks are fallible. However, the affordable route with constructing your goaltender tandem also posed a risk. So I think they needed to find kind of a happy medium in between. Like, we can't invest Shesterkin money into our goaltending position. It's just not how we're constructed.
Mm-hmm.
But we need to invest more than Georgiev money. And we need something that feels a little more sure than a Georgiev.
It was a point that you actually made a couple of weeks ago where, you commented on like, look, guys, look at what they're paying. We can't be we can't all act shocked when that's the results that they're getting. Look what they're paying. And, I think that's a fair argument. And, you give them a lot of credit because since 2018, 2017, they've gotten away with this and it's worked.
Yeah.
And you've been able to, there was a great comment that came through here a second ago that said, Parkala elevates meh goalies into good goalies and good goalies to great. And I think that's just kind of what they were saying was, how many meh and good goalies can we get in here that he can do something with? And again, it's hard to argue with the philosophy when you look at the results that they got from, and I'll even count last year. Yes, it was a fan vote, but Alexander Georgiev was at the All-Star game. He led the league in wins. So we'll even give him partial credit for last year. They were able to successfully do that for almost a decade. But I do think that you hit a point this season where you said, not you, them, the proverbial you, you're saying like, okay, we got a cup, which is great. So that means this core is already a success. But it'll be disappointing if Nathan McKinnon, Cale Makar, Mikko Rantanen, they all retire with only one ring. And I think this today was them saying, we got our cup. We did what we needed to do using that methodology. We can't waste these years. And simply rolling the dice every year in net. Yes, we've come up doubles several times. We even got Yahtzee one of the times. We just can't do that every year. You risk wasting entire seasons. I mean, before the goaltending came in and the new goaltending came in and stabilized, Megan, I had a conversation with a buddy this morning, Zach, of like, for the first time, I was sitting there going, oh shit. That Buffalo game where Scott Wedgwood came in and in that instance, had kind of changed the tide for things. I was looking at it and I said, they're going to fall several points out of the playoffs with this loss when it was 4-0.
Right.
And I was like, it's not early anymore. And suddenly you are, I think it would have been 5 points back of the playoffs that night had they lost. And it's like, oh boy, now you've got an uphill climb and no confidence in your goaltenders. I seriously, for the first time that night when it was 4-0 before the miraculous comeback, I was sitting there and I was like, we might not just be staring down a wasted year of no cup. we might be talking this team could miss the playoffs. And I just think that was a moment where the front office was like, not only are we not doing that this year, we're just not doing that anymore. Point blank.
And honestly, going back to the draft and seeing them draft so much at the goaltending position, and kind of similarly, a lot of injuries this year, a lot of players then have been asked to step up in the forward group. A lot of prospect and draft capital has been given up to bring in the affordable goaltending tandems. You lose a Nikolai Kovalenko to fix this problem. A Nikolai Kovalenko would have been a great, cheaper replacement for a player like Miles Wood, who we're projecting is returning to be more of a fourth line player. And that 6 by 2.5, 5 by 2.5, 6
for
Miles
Blackwood?
Wood. His contract.
6 years by 2.5.
Doesn't really make sense on a fourth line, no matter what your goaltending situation is, but especially now. A Kovalenko would have been a great player if you were able to have kept him. I think there's also a change in, all right, we want to draft a little more internally, some goaltending options for the future. We also want to hold on to some of our prospects because it is something that has been revealed in an unfortunate way this season. Just there's young talent in this organization that they probably don't want to give up on more than they need to be able to balance now the goaltending tandem going in at a higher number than ever before. They've got Scott Wedgwood through one more season past this one, so that's going to remain relatively intact. And I think that's going to change then. There's, this is just the first shoe, but there's going to then be a different approach to the rest of the roster. And I think the forward group is going to have to look different in season this year to accommodate this change of philosophy.
This comment up here from Alyssa, when CMAC told us a couple weeks ago, it shook us to our core. That is something that you say before you make organizational changes and philosophy type changes of we've got to change what we're doing stuff. I'm glad you brought up the capital that they were giving up to go out and get goaltenders and stuff. When they made the trade for Darcy Kemper, it's a first round pick and Connor Timmins. Darcy Kemper goes out and wins you a Stanley Cup. So you're not overly concerned with that stuff, right? Who cares? You won the Stanley Cup. But to your point, you get a couple of years removed from that and you look at the construction of the roster and you look at things you've had to move on from and you look at maybe say that bottom pairing right now. And, Josh Manson being out and all that type of stuff, you start to see maybe they could have benefited from having that kid stick around. Maybe they could have Now, where you give Chris McFarland credit is like Connor Timmins has turned into a fine third pairing guy for Toronto. The picks that you gave up however many years ago for Varlamov, one of them turned into Philip Forsberg, but that's a whole different crazy what if scenario. Philip Grubauer, you let walk and he signs with Seattle and he kind of turns into a pumpkin. Darcy Kemper is now on his second team since winning a Stanley Cup 2 calendar years ago.
Yeah, got beat out of his starting job by Lindgren in Washington.
There's some of that stuff where it's like, at the end of the day, they really haven't given up a whole lot of, crazy assets that you miss. But for a team that is already relatively tight on the assets they have, still wanting to improve their team, to your point, now saying, well, maybe we do want to address a little bit more into drafting and developing our own players, cheaper options. Yeah, I just think that this was something where you took a step back and said, we're at the point where we need to make a change and we need to change the way we're approaching this. And we need to put the goaltending conversation to bed for a couple of years.
And to give CMAC more credit, you lose out on some players like a Timmins, but you get an Ivan and you get a Malinsky and you don't have to draft these players and they end up fitting into the NHL pretty well. Now, I don't know what the future holds for Ivan sticking in an NHL lineup as health returns to this team, but I think he has a future role on an Avs roster
for sure
past this season.
I completely agree with you. Let's talk about Mackenzie Blackwood. 5.25 a year for the next 5 years. What's your thoughts on the deal with what we've seen from Blackwood so far?
I like it. I've seen mixed feelings. I've seen some people worried comes in a little bit rich, but I think that is operating off of an old standard around how the Avs have approached this position. I think there are some realities that they have to confront now with just how this position has changed and them sort of being forced to play ball with how the rest of the league constructs their goaltending. And with options going to be a little bit limited heading into free agency, whether they moved on from Georgiev or not, they were staring down the barrel of needing to make a decision around free agency with Georgiev's contract also coming to an end this year. So I think they have probably been keeping an eye on what UFA market looked like going into this year for a little bit of time. Mackenzie Blackwood's time. It's not a goaltender that they've just discovered. I believe he's been on their radar now for some time, has played good games against the Avs. And so I don't think it's just because he's gotten in a few games with the Avs and has played very well. I think with McFarland out the gate talking about this extension, there's a lot of confidence behind Mackenzie Blackwood. And I feel that confidence in him too. His ceiling feels higher than what other goaltenders have brought before, which is why I think it feels different from the other contracts offered to goaltenders before. Darcy Kemper being a great example, having an identical contract. Avs didn't view him as worth that money. I think there is more upside. I view Mackenzie Blackwood, who has just turned 28, as a goaltending prospect in a lot of ways, but with a little more starter experience under his belt, to not view it as a huge risk either. That I'm excited by it. I think 5 years gives you a little bit of insurance if this does work out really well and the goaltending market trends the way it seems to, then you've got actually a pretty affordable goaltending option at the end of this. But it's not so crazy that if you needed to move on from this in a couple years, if Nabokov is everything and more, he is the next Shesterkin, I think this is a contract that other teams would be interested in and would take on too if needed down the line, because it's just so middle of the ground for an unproven goaltender that I believe has a lot of upside.
So you made reference to that this is that people feel like it's maybe a little bit too high, but that's based on the standard that the Avs have paid. So, and I had to just do some kind of quick math. There's 2 goaltenders right now that currently make less than 5.25 that will make more than 5.25 next year. Mackenzie Blackwood will be the 17th highest paid starter in the NHL next year.
It's really middle of the pack.
And technically bottom half by 1. But to your point, the Avs are paying league average money for their starting goaltender. So it's not like they reached immediately to the highest shelf and said, we got to solve this problem, give him $8.5 million and put him into that top, 5 number in the league. No, it's a reasonable number. It's going to put him right in the middle of the league and is a number that, especially if the salary cap is going to go up in the way that is being reported right now, by year 2 or 3 of that thing, you're not even going to notice it. It's going to be back to being a value deal. I'm with you on the assessment of his time here so far, though, and I think with what you gave up for him, being Kovalenko and things like that, it's good that it's not a guy that they just have here for 4 months.
And I want to shout out the character aspect because I think investing in a player like that with a little more term than we've seen other goaltenders get, knowing his reputation is so good that the San Jose Sharks were in mourning when he left because he's just such a great teammate, also feels really good that this is less of a gamble, that he's going to be a great character fit in the room over the span of this contract.
I wasn't going to go this direction, but this is something interesting. You do wonder how much this as well is like, hey, Mikko, we just solidified the goaltending, get that deal done to stay here. Then there was another one that came in here. Oh, yeah, right here. This is the other thing that I do think is true. If you like what you've seen from Blackwood and you think that he's got the ability to take this team on a run, whether you win the cup or not, that number is going to be a whole lot higher than 5.25. There's enough season left here, Megan.
Yes.
He could get into the Vezina conversation. Again, this is all assuming that he plays to this level. He could get into the Vezina conversation. He could take you 2, 3, 4 rounds deep. He could win you a stand. Like, if any of that stuff happens, then you can't keep him.
No, he would have priced himself out in the remaining months of this season. And I know that's a huge what if, but it is one what if to consider if you're the Avs front office.
Correct. And there's even, like, he doesn't even have to be a Vezina finalist. If he plays well enough here in the back half of the year that he gets himself into that conversation, that price goes up. He doesn't have to win you a Stanley Cup. If he gets you to the second, third round, that price goes up. Like, it doesn't even, because you're right. Like, we're kind of throwing some crazy hypotheticals. Oh, Vezina, Stanley Cup championship. I'm not saying all of those things are going to happen. I'm not saying any of those things are going to happen. But with every passing day, if you like what you've seen, with every passing day, the odds of that happening goes up and goes up and goes up and goes up. Alexander Georgiev led the league in wins behind this team. Darcy Kemper won a Stanley Cup with one eye behind this team. Philip Grubauer was a Vezina finalist behind this team. You have to account for some of that stuff, and some of those accolades are what priced some of those goaltenders out of Colorado to begin with. I believe there was another one here talking about how the Kemper deal is even different from what we're seeing here, because by the time the Blackwood contract extension kicks in, the salary cap will be almost $10 million higher than it was.
It's a great point.
When Kemper signed his extension. So when you're talking percentage of cap, yes, Darcy Kemper's numbers and all that are looking the same today. They were not the same 2 years ago when you're signing those deals.
No, it's a great point that this is even less of an impact as the Kemper contract was. And I think it makes sense, though. You know, Kemper had just won a cup, so I think that did command a little bit more. But Mackenzie Blackwood is still a bit unproven in that sense.
Yep.
I think, though, this is to the Avs' advantage completely. I could have guessed Kemper's time in Washington might result in really splitting that starting job
Not
with Lindgren.
going that well.
Right. And I was excited for LA, like, to get Kemper. Like, I think LA just seriously needed to address goaltending, and I still like Darcy Kemper as a goaltender. It's just the upside that exists for Mackenzie Blackwood is something I get really excited about.
The Kemper stuff, like, you saw the peak.
I knew what he was. I knew what he was.
Right. He won a Stanley Cup, and he was really good for you. He was really good.
Especially regular season. Like, the injury stuff really probably clouded people's view of him by the end. He couldn't see.
He could not see. He was doing those post-game presses like, no, I'm fine. I'm totally fine. Half closed eye. And it's like, no, you're not, bro. All right, let's get to the last part of this. And actually, this might be a good time. So on the Blackwood conversation, going back to Hurricane, I don't think that this changes what they are able to offer Rantanen really at all. My guess is Chris McFarland has more insight on what the salary cap will be next year than we do. And barring another pandemic, they're probably banking on that. I think if there's any reason that Mikko Rantanen isn't back here next year, it's because he wants to go find more money and do something else. I don't think the issue is going to be the Avs offering him enough money to satisfy the level of player that he is.
I agree. I don't think this comes at the expense of Mikko Rantanen, but I do think it comes at the expense of other things that we might have liked that might be viewed as a bit of a luxury at this point. I think one of those things is like a Miles Wood. I won't say him specifically, but especially if he is projected to be in a fourth line role, that kind of money at the bottom of the lineup will no longer make sense.
Yep.
I think then, though, even the top 9 picture is going to have to look different. Jonathan Drouin, being as injured as he has this year, I think is going to reframe how the conversations around his extension look past this year.
Yep.
Is he then considered still a top 6 option? Can they get that number to be more affordable because of the issue with injury this year? Because right now we're looking at a Ross Colton who's in that 4x4 contract. They've just signed Casey Middlestat to be the future 2C option. Are they paying $4 million for a few more years for their third line center option? Do they find a different role for Ross Colton? Those are the conversations that I'm starting to have, but not at the expense of Mikko Rantanen. I think they will find a way to make him stay a part of the picture because he is so important to the core of this team. And I'm not saying they're trading Ross Colton or
No,
Casey Middlestat, but I think those are the types of conversation that they have to have around it.
A third from Hurricane Teabag here, and I'm skipping over one on Nabokov. Question for Megan. What about adding Matt Davis?
I mean, they invited him to development camp, and he's having a great year with DU, but I don't know what to say. In that setting, I don't think you can see enough from a goaltender to really know if there would be a future pro fit, but he would be a ways off from being an NHL option, in my opinion. Going back to the Dustin Wolf, Askarov, Dostal part of it, even though he's a little bit older, he would require some time in the American League.
Yep. This right here from the chat, when you were talking about players they'd maybe have to get rid of, this says Manson or Wood, or Manson and Wood would be their bet. And then this is an interesting question right here. Again, from Hurricane. If you have better goaltending, how important are those other things? And this is the age-old song and dance that NHL teams have been doing for years and years and years. Do you need the high-end elite goaltending, or do you need the depth? And I think it's funny because I actually think that for a couple of years, you were seeing a philosophy shift in the NHL because you had a few champions, you had a couple back-to-back champions that did it on depth and kind of whatever in net in the Avs and the Golden Knights. And I think you saw some teams changing that philosophy a bit. But it came on the heels of a team like Tampa Bay winning back-to-back Stanley Cups behind elite level goaltending. So the unfortunate answer is how important those other things, very important, but also good goaltending, very important. And I think that's why I like the balance the Avs have struck here a bit. And we'll see. Obviously, you got to go out and get the results now from your goaltending. 5.5, like you said, it's not top tier elite goaltending money, but you're paying for more than what you were getting before.
Yeah, they needed a little better than what they've had recently and more of a sure thing, though this is still a gamble. That's why it's not a Shesterkin goaltender with Shesterkin money, but similarly looking at the success of Vegas and Tampa. Tampa, over the span of many years, they had homegrown talent to lean on to help fill some of the parts of the lineup that the Avs have gotten a little lucky with in getting some of the undrafted free agents to pan out, but they're going to need to find a little more middle ground moving forward. And I think that's why it'll become more important, and perhaps why someone like Keaton Middleton is getting more of an extended look. Do they have an internal option in him? I don't know.
So the last one, the last super chat here from Hurricane Teabag, 3 super chats in one show.
Hurricane.
My goodness. Will bring us to our final topic of the day. Reports of Nabokov coming over next season. 2 caveats with this. 1, we had our own in-house Russian read through the article for me this
Russian.
morning.
So like, did he read the original Russian?
Yes.
Love it.
Yep. And he's, Mark told me that what was in the article was not a direct quote from Ilya Nabokov.
Right.
Or his representation. That there was a source in the article saying that they had knowledge on the situation and that the reason Nabokov was choosing not to entertain offers from SKA or be moved before the KHL trade deadline, according to this source, was that because he had made the decision to come over and continue his career in North America. Evan Rowell of the Denver Gazette reached out to some representation from Ilya Nabokov, and they said essentially not no comment, no confirming nor denying. So we haven't heard anything directly from Ilya Nabokov, but also in that article, there were a couple Russian GMs, KHL GMs, who said that they felt he was going to be better than Igor Shesterkin based on what he was doing right now. Your thoughts on the Nabokov situation?
I'm excited by it. I don't need confirmation that he's coming over next year specifically because I know he's coming soon. And I think it's realistic to imagine him coming over next year and spending a season in the American League. Doesn't mean he can't make an NHL debut and get some NHL games to evaluate him in that NHL setting too. But again, going back to what I've referenced as a trend with elite goaltending prospects, it is natural and normal for them to get significant starts in the American League first, especially in Nabokov's case and needing to get adjusted to North American ice. It all makes sense to get him started on that path of his timeline. And that's why I think the Wedgwood contract through next year is still a very good thing. I'm not putting Nabokov in an NHL lineup backup role as soon as next year, but I do think it's important for him to come over as soon as next year. It won't ruin his trajectory if he didn't. I don't think he should be more than a year off, though, from that
I'm with
point.
you. Yep. Shouldn't be any more than one more year.
Agreed.
And yeah, I also like what you were saying about, I truthfully thought the Blackwood extension would come in at 3 years and be a shorter track for Nabokov. But again, there's nothing that says that you have to, just because you paid a guy to be a starter right now, doesn't mean he's got to be your starter in a couple of years if you think you've got a better option. So I'm with you. It definitely gives a little bit of that gap there for Nabokov, for them to feel really good about Nabokov coming over. We got another super chat here. This one from Brooke. Bribing you for PWHL content before their game here, please. Yes, we will have plenty of PWHL stuff coming for you guys. Geez, not quite this month. Almost this month.
Oh my gosh, yeah. It did feel like we're already in January because it's just a few weekends away now, maybe 3 weekends.
Next weekend? Is it next weekend?
No, it's the 13th of
you're talking about the game. I thought you meant 3 weekends away from January.
From January.
Like, no.
No. It feels like it is January right now.
Yes. But yes, so we will have plenty of PWHL content for you guys. And we will all be there to some extent. Guerilla will have a heavy presence at the PWHL game here in Denver. You got anything else for today, Megan? Goalie heavy show. And shout out to Nicole Hensley while we're talking PWHL and goalies. Just
goalies that we love.
Just goalie show, top to bottom.
I love it. No, I'm trying to think, was there like, Josh Manson coming back tonight. Don't have to spend too much time on it. But that is a really nice and welcome return.
I don't like it, Megan.
Why don't you like it?
I haven't seen him in the last few days. When I last saw him, he was not ready to be back in the game.
Why do you think? It didn't feel like that was the area of the lineup that they're hurting the most for him to like rush back into things.
And now, granted, like I said, we aren't there today. Quick little one-off to Utah. We decided we're going to have our intermission and post-game shows and all that for everyone tonight. So I wasn't there. I didn't see him at morning skate today. I don't know what all he did in the last week. When I last saw Josh Manson, Megan, I even texted you, I think. And I said, this guy can't play in a game right now.
And it's not, it's something that time would absolutely heal. Yes. He'll be fine.
Right. And so I'm going to be really curious to see what he does tonight. I would not be surprised to see very limited minutes. I will be watching Josh Manson closely tonight.
I think it's destined to be a weird game. I hope it's not weird in bad ways. And I hope Josh Manson is okay, truly, and didn't push himself to return prematurely. But hockey players have a way of doing that because they just love playing hockey so much. Mm-hmm. So I hope he has not done that.
Maybe he got
a healing amulet.
Yes, for Christmas. We'll be watching Josh Manson closely tonight. I hope I'm wrong, and I haven't seen him in the last 5 days. And like you said, it was something that time was going to take care of. I hope time has helped.
I hope so too. A Christmas miracle.
All right,
that's it.
Let's get out of here. We've got plenty of show for everyone tonight, which I'm looking forward to. Always love doing that with you, Megan. But that's going to do it for us here today. She's Meghan Angley. I'm Jesse Montano. Thomas back there behind the glass again today. Make sure you guys can see us and hear us. We appreciate all you guys, and we'll be back talking to you here tonight. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great day.